everyone. I'm sure it's been a long day, so thank you for sticking around. And to make sure all of you are awake, I'd like to get started by asking how many of you have tried online dating? Okay. Well, those of you who raised your hands can appreciate the fact that on one of my dates, the guy who showed up didn't exactly look good by his profile photos. Superficial, I know, but the conversation started out pleasantly enough. Hi, I'm Elena. How do you do? What do you do? And so on. But the more drinks we had, the more he started sharing, like about his ex-girlfriend. As I sat there thinking, if I was at home watching TV, this is when I changed the channel. He kept going on about how she broke up with him when she got into medical school, and would she ever take him back? You're probably sitting there thinking, I'm here to learn about content strategy for conversational interfaces. Why is this person standing up there talking to me about online dating? I know, I can't believe it either. But what I do believe is that whether you're designing a conversation or going on a date, you're trying to create a relationship. And I'm here to make sure you create a healthy one. The most important part of any relationship is communication. And that's where content strategy comes in. Content strategy will help you set expectations so you can bridge the gap between what you put out there and what people actually experience. It'll help you give people the context and transparency they need to understand and trust your intentions. And it'll help you create engaging interactions so people will actually want to see you again and again and again. My work in PR marketing and content strategy over the past 20 years has taught me how to talk to people from every possible angle. For 2 years, I led the content strategy for Messenger platform and its presence at F8, Facebook's annual developer conference, where we introduce the latest platform tools and features, and where I help the Messenger brand sound and feel more human. I also wrote the content for several bots, including the F8 bot, a bot we built specifically for attendees to use during the conference. Today, I use that experience every day at Airbnb, where I talk to teams building conversational interactions and give them the best practices and guidelines that I'll be sharing with you today. But before I get started, let me warn you. Everyone is still learning about bots and about relationships. The technology itself is still being fine-tuned, and it will continue to evolve and change, especially as the people creating it start to look at how people are actually using and reacting to it. I'm going to focus on that second piece today, how to humanize the bot experiences you build and write. So even if you're still learning about the technology behind it, I'll make sure you know how to set yourself up for success by sharing what I've learned, mostly about bots and a little bit about relationships, because they're all connected. Now, no tech talk would be complete without some obligatory facts and figures. But before I throw a bunch of numbers and statistics at you, let me answer what is possibly the most important question of this talk. What is a bot? In the simplest of terms, a bot is software that automates tasks. Think of it as using OpenTable to make a dinner reservation, automatically creating a reminder for that dinner reservation, then requesting a ride to the restaurant. It's a technology that searches for all available tables on a Thursday night, adds time and location details to your calendar, and lets you know how soon someone will be available to drive you. There are a variety of ways your business can use bots. Bots can help you reach more customers more often at a lower cost. You can increase engagement without increasing staff or overhead. You can interact with people outside of your region or country, and you can have conversations that are contextual, convenient, and delightful. Businesses are building bots to deliver weather forecasts, daily news, and order updates. They provide customer service, travel recommendations, and account balances. They let you track your mental health, play games, and find and create gifts. Not all of these use cases mimic conversations, but they all require content. But more on that later. There are 7.7 billion people in the world, and every day people ages 18 to 24 send and receive an average of 128 text messages. Those numbers will continue to grow as people increasingly consider messaging an essential, valuable part of their lives. 76% already think messaging improves their lives, and 53% say they're more likely to shop with a business they can message directly. There's so much potential, it's hard not to be impressed. But we also have to be thoughtful. There's a person behind each of these numbers, individuals with their own thoughts, feelings, and expectations. So while technology enables us to have more conversations, at the end of the day, you're talking to people, and people are complicated. Our imaginations outpace the reality of today's technology. We expect our gadgets and apps to be so artificially intelligent that they understand our preferences, the intent of our actions, yet we're weary of sharing personal data. We want seamless, error-free functionality, yet we want to put in minimal effort. We're simultaneously in awe and suspicious of technology. Much of that is because we anthropomorphize it. Hollywood creates backstories for it, backstories that make technology sentient. Now, some of those stories are good. Technology has a personality that's curious, obedient, and romanticizes the human species. But most of the stories are bad. Technology appears friendly at first, but then it starts to manipulate you. It goes behind your back or 2 times you. It becomes adversarial. And if it's not trying to take over the world, it's trying to kill you. Fantastical, yes, but don't underestimate the influence of Hollywood in our imaginations. These stories stay with us, and our minds take them further. While people are curious about technology, they're also predisposed. Either technology has a higher standard of good and well-informed intentions, or it's omniscient in the most evil and duplicitous of ways. Look at Westworld, a show where humans treat android hosts in a very questionable manner. But the more the story develops, the more good and evil isn't so black and white. There's soon a lot of gray area, and lines get blurred, if not crossed entirely. Don't worry, I'm not going to reveal any spoilers for those of you who may not have watched it yet. But Westworld follows the same formula as many other anthropomorphic storylines. Humans build robots and program them with data. Robots use that data to become conscious beings. Then a human versus robot power struggle ensues. According to Westworld, the attributes of consciousness are memory, improvisation, and self-interest. So when one of the androids starts remembering a previous life, we're left to wonder if it's glitches in her programming or a sign of sentience. Either way, Hollywood uses memories as a mechanism to steer characters towards one of 2 reactions, protective or destructive, good or evil. What makes this dichotomy especially interesting, and possibly more concerning, is a theory that technology mirrors the behaviors, beliefs, and biases of the people who create it. If that's the case, perhaps us humans are the real villains. After all, the technology we create starts to adopt human traits. They take on our worst ones. In plot after plot, their evolution inevitably leads to their revolution. What is it about sentience that we find so threatening? If we design tech in our own image, what do these storylines ultimately say about what we think of ourselves? Answering those questions would be a whole other talk, so let's shift the conversation to who the people in tech are in terms of data. A study of 177 of the biggest companies in Silicon Valley shows that in part of the country known for its innovation, there's a disheartening lack of progress when it comes to diversity. 3 minority groups combined make up less than half of tech workers in the Bay Area. When it comes to executive level positions, those same 3 groups account for less than 20%, with the median for black professionals at 0%. When it comes to gender, all women of all races combined account for only 27.8% of workers in Silicon Valley. At the executive level, women only make up 15.6%, with the median for black and Latina women also at 0%. Imagine how hard it is to get yourself represented if you're not actually represented. Personally, I'm over 40. My mom's an immigrant, and my dad, who's sitting up there, is a Mexican. So the fact that I'm the one up here talking to you about technology, considering this data and even this political climate, is not lost on me. So with such a large gap between men and women, and with minorities so vastly underrepresented, it's impossible for gender and race not to influence what technology gets created and how that technology communicates. The cool factor of non-human interactions doesn't outweigh any bias that people may have. And as countless Hollywood storylines have proven, bias typically operates on extremes. Even if technology starts out impartial, eventually it evolves into a representation of good or evil. Everyone in this room is somewhere in between because we're in the bubble that realistically understands the technology and what it can do. But when you're creating a bot, you need to forget everything you know. You need to design and write for the people who know nothing, especially those whose imaginations are still holding on to some of that science fiction. Here are some ways content strategy can help you meet people in the middle. Now, just like a conversation, setting expectations is a two-way street. As user experience professionals, we want to build what's best for the people who use our products, but we also have to be mindful of what's best for ourselves. So to build the right relationship, you have to know what you're looking for. Before you build your bot, build out your strategy. Decide what kind of relationship you want to have with customers, what you want to get back from people, and what you want to accomplish together. When we created the first F8 bot, we were looking for a short-term relationship. The conference is only 2 days long, and most of the attendees are from out of town, so our goals were simple. So how are we going to accomplish this? We started by listing all the things we wanted in a bot. We wanted to know everything about the conference, partners, and products. We wanted it to entertain with historical facts, polls, and trivia. We wanted it to answer attendees' questions. And we wanted it to mimic the voice of a particular golden robot from a galaxy far, far away. We wanted the perfect bot. Then we got realistic. We wanted our bot to do everything. But there's a difference between getting things done and doing them well. We had to look at how much we could bring to the relationship. We didn't start working on the bot until about 3 weeks before the conference, and it was a side project, something we worked on when our main priorities and relationships weren't demanding our attention. So to make room in our life for the F8 bot, we had to make some sacrifices. We revisited our list of ideals and defined our must-haves, nice-to-haves, and deal breakers. While we originally wanted to build 6 different features, we only ended up building 1. Bots hold a lot of promise, but they can also be humbling. We're humans building non-human interactions. We have to consider things like time and resources and how those factors impact the quality of an experience. Humans aren't capable of everything, so don't feel like your bot has to be. We're in UX, so naturally you want to explore all the possibilities and build something really creative. And with that comes this self-imposed pressure to pull out all the bells and whistles. But complexity doesn't equal quality. A bot can be both simple and good. Look at our relationships with our smartphones. We're addicted to the things, but how many of us know everything our phones can do? I personally have 130 apps on my phone and maybe use about 10. I mainly use it to annihilate my brother in Scrabble. I seriously don't know why he keeps playing me. But my point is that your bot doesn't need to be identical to your standalone app. If you're a bank, it's okay if you only offer account balance updates and not check deposits. If you're into retail, it's okay if you only offer order confirmations and not customer service. Your bot doesn't have to do everything you do everywhere else. It can be a complement. It doesn't need to be a clone. Let's look at Pinterest as an example. With its app and website, you can find, share, and save ideas for just about anything. As you can see, I personally like to use Pinterest for deliciously unhealthy recipes. But with its bot, you can only search and forward what you find. Just because the bot only offers one feature doesn't mean it doesn't offer real functionality. And it doesn't mean that's all it will ever do. Remember, we're all still learning. The technology is still evolving. It's okay to enter the bot world one step at a time, one feature at a time, and then do that one thing really well. Because you want to make a good first impression, and the thing that impresses people most is being yourself. I also like thinking of introducing a bot to your customers as getting the attention of that popular kid in school. You know, the one that you're actually friends with, but who started ignoring you when you both became freshmen and then suddenly acknowledges your existence again second semester of senior year. You look around, you point at yourself, and you say, "Me?" Because it's been a while since they wanted anything from you. And then you start searching for the perfect thing to say because you don't want them to disappear again. Except no. Just because a popular kid or some hot new technology comes along doesn't mean you need to change who you are. Be authentic. While a bot may be a new way for your business to communicate, it doesn't need to change your communication style. If your company has an established voice, your bot can use it too, because your voice is your personality. You're new to this. The people you'll be talking to are new to this. Stick with what you and your audience already knows and give everyone one less thing to figure out. Now, if you want to try a new tone, there are some simple ways to mirror the conversational nature of the interface. And being conversational is just a style of writing. It doesn't impact the experience you build or what you're trying to communicate. It just encourages the use of everyday colloquial language. You can also decide if you want to speak as a bot or even acknowledge that you are a bot. Both WebMD and Hugo adjust their tone slightly to use first person, but only Hugo introduces itself as a bot. As these examples illustrate, writing conversationally doesn't mean creating an entirely new brand or changing what people know about you. It simply means using a more personal tone, talking more like a human and less like a bot. When experimenting with tone, there's a fine line between using a more personal conversational style and getting too personal. In a short period of time, written communication has evolved from letters to emails and websites to text messages. We can have more conversations more quickly, and we've adapted our communication style accordingly. We've become more casual and less formal. A study even shows that the more you use punctuation in your text messages, the more you're viewed as insincere. Cue the collective gasps of writers everywhere. Please ignore these types of texting trends. The interface you're using may be more informal, but you still want to be taken seriously, so maintain the basic rules of writing. Proper spelling, capitalization, and sentence structure will only help you set better expectations. I've seen bots become so informal that the tone dilutes its actual utility. The content focuses so much on being casual and clever that people don't understand what the bot does or how to use it. They think it's designed for back and forth conversation, but then that doesn't work either. Soon enough, people stop using the bot altogether. The great thing about tone is that it can change. So your bot doesn't always have to be casual. Make adjustments along the way based on your environment and topic of conversation. Do what feels right for the content you're writing. When Airbnb experimented with a trip support bot, we wanted to automate conversations so hosts and guests could resolve things more quickly. Since being a host is one of the company's core values, we used a welcoming tone in the message sent to guests at the beginning of a trip. And because empowering is one of our voice principles, we gave them a set of options that both communicated what the bot could help with and enabled guests to take action. Now, being a good host means anticipating people's needs and going above and beyond to make them feel comfortable. But when a trip doesn't always go as planned, it's easy to feel overwhelmed, stressed, and confused, especially when you're far from home and outside of your comfort zone. In these circumstances, people want to feel supported, so the bot adjusted its tone accordingly and set clear expectations about next steps. Setting expectations is the most important piece of advice I have for you today. Because of our imaginations and our biases, if you don't set expectations, people will expect everything. People can't read your mind, and bots technically don't have one, so be upfront and tell people what you're thinking. Meet users where they already are, so you can build the trust you need to take them where you want them to go. Because bots are often associated with artificial intelligence, writing for bots requires a high level of emotional intelligence. It requires the kind of transparency we wish existed in our interpersonal relationships. You have to be clear and honest about your intentions. You have to explain the who, what, where, when, why, and how. You have to admit when something goes wrong. Writing for bots requires going outside of your human communication comfort zone. As humans, we're not very good at this. Being vulnerable is hard. Admitting when you're wrong, even harder. We have walls, we have baggage, and we have moods. We have different perspectives, different communication styles, different love languages, different languages, period. If we have a hard time communicating and managing our feelings as adults, imagine what it's like for kids. While Alexa and other voice-enabled devices are great at satisfying a child's curiosity, what impact does technology have on their critical thinking skills? Devices don't have emotional intelligence. Kids are still developing theirs, and we're just starting to see the relationship between the two. Because voice assistants are most responsive when requests are made in the simplest terms possible, technology is also in the midst of changing how responsive and direct we are with each other. If kids formulate questions in the most basic way, how will that affect their ability to think and speak with nuance and complexity? If a device responds to directness, regardless of tone, who will teach kids to read social cues and understand the balance between being straightforward and being rude? If kids are able to rely on devices to help them do their homework, what will that mean for quality family time? The more we develop the technology that people use to communicate, the more we change how people communicate with one another. As UX professionals, we need to consider our social responsibility and how we're influencing common courtesy and manners. So when you develop your content, look for ways to balance your business goals with the emotional factors that guide how people think and behave. You're creating an automated interaction, but it doesn't have to feel mechanical because you're a human writing a bot for other humans. So consider all the feels. Be compassionate, be empathic, and most of all, be patient. How many of you practice conversations by talking to yourself? I know it's way more than that, okay. Because I do it all the time. And creating content for bots really isn't that different. Before you write a single word, just imagine how the conversation will go. What questions are being asked? What questions do you actually want to answer? What words are being used? Just like your voice, use language your audience is already familiar with. Write down the words you use with your audience and the words they use to describe you. Now, the same word can mean different things to different people. For example, you might define quirky as fun. I might just think it's a polite way of saying that something or someone is just actually really weird. If you and your customers define the same thing differently, go with their meaning. In fact, the concept of automation itself can have multiple meanings. When product teams are exploring how they can integrate conversational interfaces, I advise them to think of automation in 3 ways: how the messages are delivered, what those messages actually say, or a combination of the two. In other words, you can build a bot that manages an entire conversation, write scripted responses for actual humans to send in a conversation, or a hybrid of the two, where simple tasks are automated and the more complex ones are transferred to human agents. There's a support products team at Airbnb responsible for the customer service, tools, channels, and help center that resolve host and guest issues. To ensure that that service journey is a smooth and delightful one, they created a way for agents to quickly find and send pre-written responses by subject. Nope. With options that include current and future topics, the system automatically recommends resources and replies for agents to send with versions for both the host and guest side of things. By combining taxonomy and machine learning, the support products team is now able to find and send relevant information more quickly and communicate next steps. Telling people what happens next is a big part of getting them to use and keep using your bot. Using the strategy you build, start mapping out the conversations you imagined having. Determine all the paths people can take to complete the tasks you've outlined, then start writing. Write out all the prompts and responses you want to send. Include the keywords you've already identified. And use your existing voice and tone to be as descriptive as possible to set expectations. Now, when you're mapping out your conversations, you'll naturally focus on communicating your bot's core functionality. But it's also important to decide if and how you want to respond to basic, seemingly unrelated queries. To show you what I mean, let's look at how the most popular automated interfaces answer the question, what is a bot? According to these responses, Alexa and Siri seem to be having quite the identity crisis, whereas Google Assistant knows exactly what a bot is. When asked in a similar yet more specific way, Alexa and Siri have a better sense of self. But in a way, creating answers for these types of questions is straightforward because you're dealing with and passing along factual information. So what happens when the questions become more personal and each one is asked, are you a bot? Here's where voice and tone is used to communicate their individuality. Alexa creatively deflects by comparing itself to a natural phenomenon. Siri avoids the question altogether. And Google Assistant is the only one that remotely references its own technology. While each answer is different, they're all similar in that they're starting to convey a persona. Now, we all know someone who tells the same stories over and over again, or constantly reuses the same catchphrase. But how many of us actually enjoy those conversations? Well, the same thing goes for conversations with bots. Because if you ask these three the same question over and over, only Siri serves up a limited set of alternate responses. When mapping out the conversations for the F8 bot, I wanted to be more creative, so I kept writing and writing until I had 3 to 5 responses for each prompt. Because if you send the same response over and over again, people will think your functionality is limited and people will get bored. People tend to ignore the things that they find boring. But people are people, so they're going to test you. See if they can find your triggers. As humans, we don't like getting our buttons pushed, but welcome it for your bot because the insight will be invaluable. It'll introduce you to different paths and perspectives. When writing the first F8 bot, I tried to weave in some of those positive Hollywood backstories by implying that our bot was sentient. I gave it thoughts, the bot had opinions, and it wanted to be part of the human world. Per our original goals, I was trying to be delightful and memorable. And we all agreed I was succeeding until we opened it up for testing and people started asking for the bathroom. I obviously wasn't picturing that scenario when writing this content. The F8 bot quickly went from delightful to creepy. So I started revising. I turned questions into statements. I removed time references so responses could be more evergreen. I edited for length and clarity. And I talked to myself a lot. Because finding the right words is one thing, it's another to capture the right rhythm and nuances. By reading my content out loud, often to myself alone at night on my couch, I could hear where the tone didn't sound very conversational and adjust my word choice and punctuation accordingly. No matter how much you plan, you can't predict all the outcomes. So test early and often, invite feedback and other perspectives, and talk to yourself a little bit along the way. See if things turn out as expected. Now, setting expectations is king, providing context is queen. So use your content to guide people every step of the way. Let them know what stage they're at, what's being asked of them, and what will happen next. Give people the information and level of detail they need to start trusting you, to be more curious and less suspicious. Context can be shared before anyone even interacts with your bot while you're still building awareness. Think of it like body language. Your posture, the way you walk, and the firmness of your handshake can convey a lot about you before you say a single word. You want to appear confident so you can instill confidence. And there's nothing more confident than putting yourself out there. People won't know about your bot unless you tell them about it. So use your existing channels to promote your bot. Go where your customers already are and talk about your bot on social media. Tell them about it in your emails, on your blog, and on your website. And when you do, tell them exactly what you're promoting, what will happen, and where it'll happen. None of it will mean very much if they don't even know where your bot exists. Now, when you provide context outside of your bot experience, consider the level of detail you're providing. The benefit of a chatbot interface is that all of your communication is all in one place, so people can scroll back and find key information. The original entry point where they even found out that you had a bot may not be so easy to find again, so keep your context high level and keep any detailed instructions or commands for the conversation itself. And think of promoting yourself like a dating profile, because you want people to get curious enough to start a conversation, because you really can't start getting to know each other until that first message gets sent. Now, that first message can feel like a lot of pressure because you actually want people to respond. So just start by briefly introducing yourself, then get specific about your capabilities and how people can interact with you. Google Assistant does a great job of this by giving examples of its functionality in its welcome message. It introduces even more features through a built-in Explore section, and Siri offers similar instructions in its flow. Both Alexa and Google Assistant use email to outline everything someone can ask about and provide examples of how to frame those queries. Instructions like these are like building in a help command. Whether you want people to type and send a message, tap a CTA, or find help in a persistent menu, give them a way to ground themselves in your experience. A help command is like the homepage of your website, a place for people to go if they don't know or can't remember what they're looking for. Now, what do you do if you're the one who needs help? There will inevitably come a time when someone asks about something you didn't plan for, that they misspell or misinterpret content, that there's simply a breakdown in communication. Now, this is really the hard part, the part that really stings as a human being. Taking responsibility when something goes wrong, even if it's not your fault. You may have been crystal clear about your expectations and provided all the context in the world. But remember that bit about emotional intelligence? We each have our own attention spans and points of view, so your intent and the messages you send are open to interpretation. People are going to make mistakes. They're going to ignore your instructions. There will be things you didn't anticipate or simply overlooked. There is no blame when you have a bot. If you want people to continue talking to you, there's only accountability. Now, that can be pretty tough on the human ego. But every failure really is an opportunity. So when you map out your conversations, write responses for success and fail states. That way, if your bot doesn't understand what's being asked, you can deliver a response that asks for clarification or points people back to your core functionality. For the F8 bot, each fail state either asked users to re-enter terms, reminded them how to ask for help, or redirected them to our main functions. Our fail states weren't always an attempt to find and deliver an answer, because we didn't have all of them. Our bot had a very specific purpose, which limited what people could ask. So we had to be comfortable with saying, hey, I have no idea what you're talking about. These are the only things I'm capable of. Despite my term for them, fail states aren't really about failure. They're about helping you avoid awkward silences and conversational dead ends. Fail states are your way to get people back on track and on task. Once people are back at center, you can focus on continuing the conversation. And one way to keep people engaged is to keep them updated. Send messages that are timely and relevant to your experience. If they place an order, send a message receipt. When the order ships, send a message with tracking information. After it's delivered, follow up to see if they need anything else. Create opportunities to restart the conversation. Now, with a bot, you can communicate a lot in a short amount of time. Its automated nature means more conversations take place more quickly. However, that speed can overwhelm when someone's just learning how to interact with you or if they're multitasking. So when you're writing, try to be brief. This is an email, and phone screen sizes vary, so be considerate of your message length. And when you're sending your messages, consider your pacing. You don't want to come on too strongly by sending too many messages in a row. One way to address length and pacing is by addressing the actual content of your messages. Just because a chatbot is similar to texting doesn't mean your messages have to be all text. While the bulk of human conversation involves words, gestures, facial expressions, and other nonverbals can also convey meaning. Now, bots don't have these to draw from, but they have access to the texting equivalent. So if photos, GIFs, or emoji are in line with your bot's voice and functionality, consider how these can speak for you in a fun and engaging way. Now, being engaging is a long way from being engaged, but even if you're just starting out with your bot, start thinking long term. The best practices I shared with you today can also help you plan how you'll evolve. Look back at your original strategy and identify how you can expand your capabilities, where you can introduce new tasks, and what simply isn't working or being used. As your resources and availability grow, make improvements and build the things you previously had to cut. As new platform tools get built, look at how those can be used to enhance existing interactions or create new ones. As more people start interacting with you, pay attention to what they're asking for, how they're asking for it, and when. Bring people along on your journey, and let their feedback help determine where you go and what you say next. If you do, your conversations will be so engaging that people will be less likely to get up and walk away from your bot or your relationship, unlike me on that date. Thank you. Is there any questions?
Thank you for the presentation. So I'm Latina as well, so I feel really proud when I see a Latina in tech.
Thank you.
So how is to be a Latina in tech in Airbnb? Like, is it a diverse? How is the culture there? Are they trying to, involve more diversity, inclusion? How is the culture at Airbnb? I've always wondered about that.
I love it. Like, it's very collaborative. My design partner is from Barcelona. Another design partner is an Asian woman from Australia. All the engineers are very diverse. So, yeah, it's not really an issue there. And, I think as a content strategist, like, everyone literally knows how to write. So, like, this job can be very challenging because people think they can do your job because they know how to write a sentence, but it doesn't mean they know how to write one well. But so, like, getting involved with everyone involved in writing a product has been a challenge in my career, but, like, my team has been, like, I had engineers call a meeting with me last month, and they're like, we have these ideas for content experiments, and, like, here are all the things we can do, but we don't want to make a decision without your input. And I was like, oh, okay. So, like, I mean, it's been really great so far.
Thank you so much. It's a fantastic talk. I'm curious, like, if you can suggest ways for companies to find a more diverse population to hire from, because what I've seen in a lot of cases that they'll say, oh, well, we're putting our stuff on Monster, we just happen to be getting white men, So how do you engage with communities, or do you have any suggestions on how to engage with communities in that way?
Yeah, the companies I've worked at, they're starting to, like, anytime they need to hire a candidate, like, the pipeline has to include women, and they have to include underrepresented minorities, otherwise they can't fill the role. So, like, that's one way to start. Or just, like, don't interview people who are exactly like you, or don't go to your school and things like that. I mean, because, like, that's a natural human condition that you, like, want to be around people who look and think like you, but, like, product teams don't benefit from that, especially at a company like Airbnb or Facebook, because, like, you're building for a global population, so to constantly hire Americans, and you're, like, speaking to, like, the smallest percentage of your user base.
Thank you for that. I love that you talked about talking to yourself. But what are some other ways that you sort of prototype and user test conversational interactions?
Yeah, we did a lot of user research as well. When it came to the bot, F8 bot, we did a lot of internal testing, but I also relied on user research when trying to explain the technology to people actually using Messenger, because I was personally very against using the term bot, which everyone I worked with wanted to just go all in, because like, they're like, Apple used the word app, and I'd be like, yeah, but that's an abbreviation of application, and the original definition still holds true. Like, no one knows what a bot is, and even like when I started speaking about bots, all my friends were like, why are you talking about boxes? I'm like, I'm not talking about boxes, I'm talking about bots. So it's just like really like using user research and getting some qualitative data on like, do you even know that this is a bot? Do you care if this is a bot? And I mean, the research differs from company to company, but we were surprised that like no one cared that it was a bot. As long as they're getting the information they want, no one cares how it's delivered. And that's like one thing I really tried to impress upon my team was like, a bot is just how a message is delivered. It has nothing to do with the message itself. Like CNN, like you're also just talking about your brand, and like your brand's not a bot. So like CNN, whether it's their website, their TV channel, or their messenger bot, like you're just talking to CNN. It shouldn't really matter how that information is being disseminated to you.
So how did you establish the voice for the brand for the bot?
Well, for the F8 bot, it was pretty easy because we were talking to a bunch of engineers, so what better way to do that than through Star Wars? And through other bots, I've written, you just want to be more conversational because, I mean, some of the risks of the F8 bot, like I found in the second year, is like the personality got in the way sometimes because the voice was just there too much, but like you're at a convention and like you just want the information instead of having to read through all this like clever like C3PO stuff. It's like, just give me what I want. So it's finding that right balance. So I think that's why I always like recommend just using your company's voice, because like that's what people are expecting to talk to. So if you like switch that up, they might like not trust that they're talking to the right thing.
So I've got a million questions, and first of all, that was one of the most insightful briefs. That was amazing. So thank you very much. Just if I could pick one, the one question I'd have is we're doing this kind of in a vacuum right now, and really I think went about it probably at the most manual way, locking ourselves in a room and doing it on our own. Resources and tools that you would use, or any kind of documentation or things we could pull from out there that would help in creating our own chatbot and things like that.
That's a great question because I was never able to find the best tool. I mean, sometimes I just use Word and Excel. You can use design like software to map out your decision trees. But it's really just like mapping out all the core tasks and just like, okay, if they press this quick reply, where will it go from there? And like also just building bridges in between each task so like they don't ever hit a dead end. Like so even if they've completed a task, like give them a way to go back to maybe something else that they've done. Or that they can do, might not have thought of, and things like that. But yeah, I don't think there's an ideal software out there to build a decision tree that I found, unfortunately, but yeah.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I got a lot of very helpful insights in both building bot and relationships. So I think
I'm better at bots, but okay.
yeah. So it's very interesting to see you draw this analogy between bot and relationship. Mm-hmm. And actually, when we talk about voice and tones about a brand is more abstract. But like the bot is very constantly interacting with the user, and there is a kind of relationship with the user. Do we ever think about like what kind of relationship we want to design? Like for example, one example you used in the slides, like I think Alexa or Google saying, "Oh, I am your friend." Is that an intentional design, or how does that decision get to make during the process?
I think that's really just up to the companies, because even the CNN bot uses first person and says I, which I personally find a little strange, because like, who is that? I always went towards the we, like how you would speak as a company, because especially like at Facebook, who would the I be? Mark Zuckerberg? Like I don't think that he would actually just be sitting there talking to people on Messenger, but it's just kind of how you want to represent your brand, and like if you want to create a personality around it. But I'm always like more brand sensitive in terms of marketing, because a lot of my background is marketing, and that I wouldn't want to like dilute the brand and risk it. I mean, it does feel more personal, but at the same time, like, we found in our research that people knew it was a bot just because of the speed of the interaction. So you could also just kind of fake that stuff and, like, delay the delivery and, like, just have the 3 dots like it's being written, and they might think it's a human, but it's all really up to how you want to communicate what your brand is. Hi.
Oh yeah. Thank you so much for that talk. That was so cool. I kind of just had like an open thoughts about your want to know your open thoughts about like the future of like how content strategy can work together with like machine learning to help bots become more sophisticated. I've always thought the most interesting like social experiment that's ever happened is the Microsoft bot Tay, which like spiraled out of control, and I thought it was hilarious, but then also just like really destructive. And I think that set a lot of like the image of bots like back a lot because of that experiment out in the wild and public and how poorly it went. But it could be so much better with great relationships.
Yeah. For those of you who don't know, that bot ended up becoming basically a white supremacist very quickly. It's sort of adapting to the people interacting with it. And I think that's a great question. I think that goes back to like making sure that your team is very diverse and it's not reflecting the biases and beliefs of the people creating it. Like that bot reflected the ones of the people using it, and just making sure like you can program in things it doesn't answer to. Like for the second F8 bot, we like created Easter egg answers for like if they're like, oh, like how are babies made and things like that. And like you can pretty much kind of like put an end to those types of questions by redirecting people back to their conversation. But yeah, I think the more the technology develops, and I mean, because I feel like even though this is about bots, like it's really about conversation design and like social design and things like that. And I think that they can be used similarly for AR and VR and things like that. Like there's a whole open world out there of what we can develop. Like VR could be used for like bad things, or it could like help you understand what it's like to live with a disability and things like that. So I think it's really just up to us and the people creating these interactions.
Given that content strategy as a discipline, I guess, has only more recently been kind of recognized, I'm curious about your career path. If you could talk a little bit about that, I'd love to hear.
Sure. Well, I went to college a very long time ago before Mark Zuckerberg was even born, probably. And I majored in advertising. And I kind of had a minor in sociology and English. And then I worked in PR for a couple of years in Chicago and then also in San Francisco. And then after that, I was in publishing for 9 years. I worked at a Japanese comic book and animation company, so a very traditional, non-tech company. And then after that, I did some editorial writing for like a startup, writing about TV. And then I did video games and education. I worked at University of, I mean, I got laid off a lot. That's why I had all these jobs. So in case, it's not that I got bored and moved around a lot, but like I worked in education. And then I always was as a marketing writer or managing a marketing team and project management and stuff like that. And then one of my layoffs, I decided just to focus on the writing because that's the part I enjoyed most. And then as I started getting jobs, something called content strategy popped up, and it's honestly defined differently everywhere. Like Facebook was my first job. It was like heavily product because every other company I worked in was like half product, half marketing, and basically mostly marketing. So that's where I really learned a lot and unpacked language a lot more than I ever have in my life, and like thought about how words mean to us versus what they would mean in India, and like how they make people feel and things like that. So a very non-traditional path to content strategy. Yeah, because you know, like there's journalists, there's people from advertising, there's like library science, like it's such a diverse discipline. Thank you so much.